Hey guys, welcome back to Breaking the Barrier. I'm your host, Rebel Saklocha, and today I am joined by Alexa Wilcox. She's an accomplished cowgirl serving as the head women's rodeo coach at New Mexico Junior College, a philanthropist, and a trailblazer in the equine industry. Alexa, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, to kick things off, give us some background on your upbringing and interest in the equine world and how you really got started.
Yeah, so I grew up in a small rural town in southeastern Colorado. It's a town called Fowler, and my dad had a large cattle ranch there, and my mom worked in a nonprofit that helped in rural development. And so just early on had a passion for rural communities as well as agriculture as a whole. I was involved in 4-H and FFA. I've been riding horses since I was probably 3 years old. And just really, enjoyed that way of life. My dad continued to go on and train horses, was very successful as a showman in the versatility ranch horse competitions in AQHA. And just really enjoyed the horses and enjoyed competing. And so thought that I really wanted to stay in the arena in some form or fashion. And at that point in time, all of my friends were rodeoing, and I just decided that I wanted to do that too. So I ended up competing in high school and junior rodeos, and then went on to college to rodeo at a collegiate level. Um, I went to Texas Tech for all 4 years of my undergraduate degree. I studied agricultural communications. Again, just really passionate about the Western industry, passionate about agriculture and educating, the general public about rodeo and agriculture as a whole. Enjoyed my time at Texas Tech, was on the rodeo team there, competed at the college rodeos, but then also was the team president and just got a lot of firsthand experience of running a rodeo program. And then when the time came for graduation, my mom just kept pestering me, what are you going to do with your life? What are you going to do with your life? And I just was like, man, I just don't feel ready to go into the workforce. I want to learn more. And so I found myself exploring graduate school options and came across a program at Oklahoma State called the International Agriculture Program. It really piqued my interest. I could kind of join my communications background with business classes, which is what I was really interested in, and then had the opportunity to travel as well as part of the degree. So I found myself in Stillwater, Oklahoma. I had an assistantship with the program itself, working in their communications department, and then came across a gentleman named Jackson Kaguri, and he had a nonprofit for his hometown in Rwanda. His hometown in Uganda, actually, where he empowered women to house orphans and allow them to go to school, but he was empowering women through business ventures and mainly agriculture business ventures. That piqued my interest in Uganda and the power of women internationally and what they can do for their communities, especially through agriculture. And I found myself going to live in Uganda for 2 months, studying a women's program sponsored by Field of Hope, which is a nonprofit that works in Uganda. And I lived there with the women of their program. I worked with them every day, and I ended up interviewing all of them for my thesis research, which focused on women's empowerment through agriculture in sub-Saharan Africa. So I did all of that, lived in Uganda, and then came home for my second year at Oklahoma State. And I actually was awarded a position as the assistant rodeo coach at Oklahoma State. So while I was finishing my thesis working with women in Uganda, I was also coaching or helping to coach the team there at Oklahoma State. That was full, of undergraduate and graduate students as well. So that was kind of my start in life, if you will, the long version anyways. But that's kind of where I come from.
Yeah, absolutely. Very cool. Well, there's so many different rabbit holes we can and will go down eventually. But what I want to kick off with is, right now in your role as a rodeo coach at New Mexico Junior College, you get to work with students every day and get to have sort of a firsthand impact on them. Talk us through your personal college rodeo experience, and was there a certain point in that experience that you decided that you would enjoy coaching yourself?
Coaching was honestly probably like the biggest plot twist of my life. I came to college rodeo not necessarily as an accomplished high school rodeo athlete. I mean, I had some good, some good wins and a relatively fair record, but nothing outstanding, especially when we talk about, coming to Texas where there's so many competitive athletes. And so my first 2 years of college were honestly a really hard learning curve. But I will say that I was always passionate about learning all I could and trying to be the best that I could. And so that really helped me find myself in a really, good situation then in my junior and senior year where I did have a lot of success in the college rodeos and just in general rodeoing. And so, I attribute that to some really great coaches in my life. I was fortunate to be coached by Lindsay Sumter when I was in high school and junior high. And then I had Philip Berry was a coach at Texas Tech that really influenced me and my rodeo career greatly. And so I was really grateful for that. And I was just really grateful that, at some point in my career, I finally reached the moment where the hard work did pay off. I left a lot of goals unaccomplished, unfortunately, but at the end of the day, I did become the competitor that I always knew I could be and that I wanted to be. And like I said, that's, in large part to those people that invested in me. And so, in the grand scheme of things, I never thought that I would even be qualified to be a rodeo coach, to be honest. That wasn't something that I ever thought someone would deem me as worthy of, if you will. But I do have a passion for education. I have a passion for, empowering other people, especially the younger generation, if you will. And so I think that just led me to this perfect crux of I have a passion for rodeo. I love rodeo. I love the Western industry and way of life. And I also have a passion for young people and education in general. And so if the intersection of those two things would automatically be rodeo coaching. And I've learned a lot just in the last 3 years of being the coach here at New Mexico Junior College about what that really means and what that influence and impact looks like and how it might be different than what you think from the outside. And just how, the mix of like your own emotions and your own heart that you put into these students and with their heart and mission for themselves or goals for themselves. And so it's an interesting mix. It's very rewarding. It's also very challenging. But no, I never in my life did I ever think like, oh, I'll be a rodeo coach in my future. But I'm very thankful for it, for sure.
Yeah. Funny how life works out. How would you describe your coaching philosophy?
I feel like, to put it plainly, I'm very dedicated to investing or raising champions inside of the arena just as much as outside of the arena. For most of these kids, this is kind of the end of their rodeo road. Maybe not all of them, but for a lot of them, they're going to find themselves working a full-time job after college and maybe rodeoing on the side, maybe not. Maybe, they find themselves giving rodeo up as, a sole competitor after college. And so I want to make sure that they're prepared for what happens next. What does that full-time job look like? What does raising a family look like? What does being a partner in a marriage look like? And how can they be their best selves moving forward into that? I think it's hard for college kids to have that kind of perspective, right? So as their coach, I feel like it's my responsibility to have that perspective for them and hold them accountable when they need to, show them grace when they need it, and then just, try to invest in the humans that they're going to be after college rodeo is over. And if that means that they're going on in rodeo, even better. Those traits or those characteristics are still going to come in handy and still be really important and vital to them. And so I try to, focus on the person as a whole just as much as I focus on their skills and their competition level in the rodeo arena.
Really cool. Well, from the outside looking in, rodeo seems to me like a very unique sport to coach just because of so many variables. I mean, you're dealing with, number one, multiple events or sports, if you will. But as you mentioned, you're also helping these athletes through issues with their horses, mental game, etc. What has been the biggest learning curve for you as a coach as you're trying to address all these different areas?
Yeah, I think probably you touched on it, the mental part of it. You know what I mean? Like, no athlete, in my opinion, is the same mentally as the next one. And so how I coach them is different. What I say to them is different. How I say things to them is different. How far do we break it down? how much do I coach on their horse versus them?
Mhm.
All of that plays into making sure that at the end of the day, they still have confidence that they can do that, because I feel like that's one of the biggest pieces. If you ask any rodeo athlete, what's the biggest part of your competition, they're going to tell you the mental game. And unfortunately, like in a basketball game, you have 4 quarters or 2 halves. So there's always an opportunity for a comeback. In rodeo, we have, in the breakaway roping, you have 2 seconds. And after that, it's over. There's no opportunity for that comeback. And so that can be, really detrimental to someone's confidence. It can be detrimental to just their mental game. And so making sure that we're building them up when they need built up, focusing on what went right, what did you do well, let's talk about that, and then let's talk about what we can do better. I really try to encourage my students that we win some and we learn some. Anytime we lose is just an opportunity for us to learn how to get better and go back to the practice pen and focus on that, and put in the time, we need on those specific aspects. Like you said, there's so many variables in rodeo. In the barrel racing, we have the ground, you have your horse if they're not feeling great that day. You have setups in the pens and how close is the barrel to the fence and what's going on in the stands. The goat tying, we have the goats, of course. You have your horse. Shadows. There's crazy stuff. Then I battle injuries a lot too with the goat tying, so making sure that those girls are stretching and that they're doing the work outside of the arena that they need to make their body strong. Making sure that they're taking the right practice to make sure that they're not making their bodies exhausted before we have to go perform is important. And then the breakaway roping, you have horses are huge in the breakaway roping, seeing the correct start so that you get the best go at the calf that you draw, and then the calf that you draw. We have 280 girls in the breakaway roping in our region, which is astronomical. And so getting the best draw is not going to happen every rodeo, but being able to make the best draw count when you do get it is important. And so trying to make sure that those girls are prepared for when opportunity, meets that preparation is important to me. But yeah, really just making sure that they're confident in themselves and in their horse before it ever starts is something that has been a huge learning curve for me. Thankfully, I have 7 sisters, so I'm very well versed in varying personalities and the
Wow.
dynamics of how everyone can get along. I honestly think that has done me so well in life. So that has made it a little bit easier for me to adapt when I have different personalities and different coaching styles, if you will, for each individual. But overall, as a whole, it's hard to do that. And I have 20 girls right now, so investing
Wow.
the amount of time I want to invest in each of them is becoming more of a challenge too, because I'm spread a little bit thin with all 20 girls and then their horses. And I've joked that I basically have, a vet tech license now since I've been a I'm always doctoring something or helping someone figure out, how do we mitigate this problem. I'm giving drugs a lot more than I ever thought I would be. But that's kind of what's unique about coaching, especially at NMJC, is that we do kind of have this whole wraparound situation with our rodeo athletes where we're able to give them that much. I'm their academic advisor, I'm their vet advisor, I'm their coach, obviously in the arena, but then I'm also their life coach outside of the arena. And this is really unique to be able to invest that much in each student.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to hear you talk about all those different facets because your job description truly extends so much further than anyone from the outside would think. And just the impact that you have on your athletes is just, I'm sure, very heartwarming for you, especially as you progress throughout the season. But I want to backtrack a little bit. Obviously, you have a heart for investing in young women, especially in the ag industry. Talk a little bit about your master's thesis and what that experience was like in Uganda visiting with those women.
Yeah, so I ended up working in Uganda for 5 years after I got my thesis. So I finished my my graduate degree at Oklahoma State in international agriculture and was hired on at Field of Hope actually as their program manager and then later promoted to their executive director. And so, really with my thesis, I wanted to focus on what these women thought about the programs that, were being delivered to them. If you look at kind of the research at that time when I was in graduate school, all of the research was done talking about the organizations and what they were doing and how they were impacting these women But it stood out to me that no one stopped and asked the women what they thought about the programs that they were participating in. And so that's really what my thesis, kind of the main objective was to hear the women's voices about what, the programs were doing for them and what they wish the programs would do more of or less of or better of. And so that was, the whole premise of my thesis was to figure out what the women wanted and how they felt about the programs. And what is really unique about my experience that doesn't always happen was I was actually able to take the results of my thesis and then implement them into Field of Hope's programs as in my role as program manager. And so that was probably one of the most impactful things for me, was to be able to hear from the women what they wanted, or what they thought needed to be different, and then work with them later to make that happen and make that a reality. And so that was extremely rewarding. I had an amazing team in Uganda through Field of Hope. I worked with Agnes, Walter, Nicholas, and Joseph, and we really were intentional about designing programs that had a lasting impact that would live far longer than we would, if that makes sense. And so just being able to, help women achieve the things that they wanted to achieve for their family and send their students to school like they wanted to was very challenging, because there's so many challenges internationally that we as Americans just truly don't understand or can't actualize until you're living it. But it was also very rewarding to celebrate their small successes with them and just know that that's hopefully amounting to a larger success, which then, leads their family out of poverty and helps their child go to university and helps them achieve the lifelong dreams that they weren't ever sure were possible, that here in America I've always been told that I could do and, was up to me to make happen. And so being able to kind of reduce the barriers that they face was just really rewarding for me.
Certainly. Well, it's interesting. So often we think we're doing a good thing and we take all this action, but we never slow down to actually ask the important questions in terms of impact. What was some of the feedback you received from these women in your conversations with them?
Yeah, so they really, their motivating factor was send my child to school and feed my family. Those were the main two priorities of all the women involved in the agriculture programs at Field of Hope. And that remained true my whole time with Field of Hope. But beyond that, they really wanted education. They wanted access to knowledge that Field of Hope was giving them, but at that point in time, they kind of were giving them the surface level, and these women really wanted to truly understand the process of agriculture and understand just how great of an impact it could make on their families. They also wanted an opportunity to diversify their incomes with, secondary businesses. And so with that, we added in business trainings and small enterprise loans. And then beyond that, they also just wanted a clear direction of what does this program look like? What does it look like when you leave? Are we, going to be able to be sustainable without your influence? And how are you going to just turn around and leave one day and we'll never see you again? And so being able to communicate what the program plan was, and what markers we wanted them to meet before we did exit that community was important. But then also just letting them know, like, we're here for your lifetime. We're not turning our back on you as soon as you reach a certain marker. We are here for the sustainable development. And I strongly believe that sustainable development, maintains monitoring throughout the whole lifetime of the project. And that project might last longer than the 3-year period of the program plan. It might last 25 years, and hopefully that is lasting that long. That means it's successful and sustainable, but that doesn't mean that Field of Hope then is never present during those 25 years. We are coming back, we're monitoring, we're helping with the random problems that arise when you talk about group work. Something I learned early on was just how blessed we are in America, I guess you can say, or fortunate we are to understand group dynamics from a young age. Most of our agricultural students or young adults have been in 4-H clubs or FFA clubs or a club of some type. And so when we talk about the group dynamics of how groups work together and who's the leader and who's the follower and what roles are there in this group and how can you, maintain peace when we're all working for common goals, we kind of take that for granted. And that's something that we had to go back and teach these groups of women, because they all operate in groups, was just the kind of group dynamics. This is how you work together, because they'd never had that opportunity before. And so just even like the smallest things, produce impact, but also you have to think about building a foundation for them to then launch off of themselves and giving them the decision-making power to decide where they go from here. Is also important. That's a huge part of empowerment, is their autonomy to make decisions for themselves. And so rather than us coming in and dictating, this is what you're going to do as a group and this is what we want to see, it was more of, okay, as a group, decide where you're going and what your goals are and what you want to do here. So that's kind of a little bit about how the study ended up and then how the work followed afterwards.
Yeah, very cool. Well, it's clear to me that there is a common thread between this experience and what you're doing now. What, in your opinion, do you see that common thread to be, and what is rewarding about being involved in these spaces?
Man, throughout my lifetime, I would say that something that has always stuck out to me, I'm a Christian. I've been a longtime follower and lover of Jesus. And something that has always just kind of been a common thread in my life is love Jesus and love your neighbor. And I feel like throughout my career, as hodgepodge as it may seem, the common theme there is to love your neighbor. And I just genuinely love people and I love helping people. I think, God has equipped us all with unique skills. And I think he's equipped me with some that just allow me to relate to people in a lot of different ways and be able to help them or encourage them at the very least. And so I would say probably that loving my neighbor has looked vastly different throughout my lifetime so far, but I do think that's probably a common theme or motivating factor, if you will, through my career.
Yeah, I think when you have a strong foundation of what you believe in, it doesn't really matter what you're doing. You find a way to see that through, and I see that very evident in the things that you have done. Something really cool that I stumbled across, and as we were talking before the recording, are a little bit of Facebook stalking that is required before any interview. It's interesting to me because so often in the Western industry, I shouldn't even say Western industry, really the world in general, people are very quick to complain about something or wish that something was different, but they're in most cases not necessarily very likely to take action on that. And you proposed a rule change to the AQHA to add the breakaway roping. Talk about that process, what spurred that initiative, and kind of what that process was like.
Yeah, so in all honesty, even though my dad was successful in AQHA, I was kind of a late bloomer into AQHA. I don't think I entered my first AQHA show until maybe 2019. It just wasn't something that was on my radar. I was rodeoing, I was college rodeoing. Showing horses hadn't really been on my radar. And so I was dating my now husband at the time, and he was really invested in showing through the AQHA. So I would go to horse shows, the World Show, and help him with his horses, warming them up, getting them ready to show. And I just had an opportunity to be a spectator of AQHA, of the World Show, of the variety of disciplines there. And something that always stood out to me was that we had an open tie-down class, which means that any professional can enter the tie-down roping, but we only had an amateur breakaway class, which means that you can only enter if you don't have your pro card and if you are riding your own horse. You couldn't ride, outside horses in that class. And to be completely honest, the first World Show that I watched, the amateur breakaway finals, honestly was disappointing to me as a breakaway roper. I knew the event was better than maybe what was portrayed in that specific year's finals. And I was just kind of disappointed that I didn't know anyone entered in the show. I think I maybe knew one person entered in the AQHA World Show. And despite all that, I know a lot of really successful breakaway ropers, but I didn't hardly know anyone in the show. And that then I was thinking, well, all the people that I do know are professionals. All the women that I know that breakaway rope, most of them are professionals. They're training outside horses. They're competing in pro rodeos or, very high level of amateur rodeos at the time. And so I was just like, how do we solve this problem? And I also am someone that's very passionate about listening and learning before I start speaking or, trying to change something. That's something I would say that international development and Field of Hope taught me really well was let's understand the problem before we start throwing solutions at a problem. And so I entered the amateur show and, I made the world show, qualified for the world show, I think my first year, and just really tried to better understand the purpose of the AQHA, of the shows, etc. And at that point in time, it just pulled at my heart that I know so many accomplished cowgirls in the breakaway roping that have no place in the AQHA at this point in time because there was no open breakaway roping. There was no open breakaway class. And so that just kind of moved me to petition AQHA to add the class. At this point in time, it's not judged. My original proposal was that the class be judged, with time being a factor of that judged score. But ultimately, judging the horse on the start, box work, the run and rate, and then the stop, and then the fifth component being their time. And at this point, we don't have that accomplished yet, but we at least have an open breakaway class. And, it gives a platform for my friends and my colleagues that are very accomplished horse trainers that are women that have their pro rodeo cards, an opportunity to show that skill in the pro rodeo, in the AQHA world. And so that just really, that was kind of how that started and how I was motivated to do it. Thankfully, my research experience through my thesis came in handy, and I conducted some surveys. I had over 100 people respond to the survey that I conducted for AQHA, just kind of proof of the fact that the class would be successful. And, it takes a village to get anything changed, really. And so I was just kind of the voice, or the loudest voice, for everyone else that was invested in getting that class started.
Absolutely. What I love about that is you looked at that and your approach was more, how can I elevate this, as opposed to, I can't believe they don't have this is terrible, etc. It came from a place of genuinely wanting to elevate the sport. And I think that's when you can really make positive change happen. But what I think is the coolest part of this whole story is after it was added, you became the inaugural champion of the open breakaway roping. That had to be a pretty cool full circle moment.
Yes, we can get lost in the semantics of that. But the first year they had it, they actually had what they call like an open stakes class. So you could just enter the class. You didn't have to qualify for it at the World Show, but you could enter it. And I think it was kind of their proof of concept, if you will. And so I honestly, at that point in time, I had no breakaway horse of my own. But I had been helping my husband with his outside horses, and we had a client that was interested in letting me enter on her horse in that class. And I felt very strongly that, hey, I've been advocating for this class. I have to be entered in this class. And so I was fortunate enough to enter and compete on a client's horse, and that horse did their job that day, and I happened to be the fastest time of the day. So it really worked out. And honestly, what's kind of a fun full circle moment there was one of my Ugandan employees was actually at the World Show that day when I won that class. And he was here visiting as a World Food Prize fellow. And he got to watch me win the worlds, so it's kind of both my worlds collided. My horse world and my Ugandan world collided that day. And that's probably my favorite memory of the entire day, was that Nicholas was in the stands. And when I did my victory lap, he stood up. He was so excited. And then, my dad was there as well, which was really exciting. And then, of course, my husband too. And so it was really special. It was really special to see that come full circle. And then, I just felt like that was just reinstating that passion, if you will, for me, was to be able to walk away as the champion of that day.
That's really neat. Well, what advice would you give someone who is, maybe it's not even an issue in the equine industry necessarily, but they're on the fence about taking action on an issue or bringing something to fruition? What advice would you give that person?
I give my girls advice that if you see a problem, stop and think how you can be the solution before you complain about the problem, or how you can be part of the solution. And I think that's honestly good advice for anything. Anytime you see a problem, stop and think, how can you be part of the solution? And if you're not willing to be part of the solution, then I don't know that you necessarily need to be complaining about the problem. In the Western industry, I think we're all pretty good about when there's an issue that we're passionate about, we join forces with others to combat that issue and not just sit back and talk about the issue. And so I would say, if you feel strongly enough about an issue or a problem that you want to be involved, first of all, go to those that are already in charge or are already combating that problem and listen and learn from them. Most of the time on the surface, things look very different than they do once you actually get into the depth of the dynamics and the processes that are involved. I feel like a lot of times we can fix a process of something, and that typically will help us find a solution or solve the issue. And so if you go in and just try to start solving the main issue, you might miss problems that are going to come up later in the processes because you didn't start at the beginning. And so, yeah, if you feel strongly enough, stop and think how you can be part of the solution, and then do so in a way that, kind of like you said earlier, elevates the ultimate goal. Instead of fighting people, fight with people, if that makes sense. And so fight the problem with other people. Don't fight people over a problem. I'm not sure if that really makes sense, but that's kind of how my perspective is about anything. And like I coach on my athletes, if you see a problem, try to be part of the solution. Don't just make the problem bigger.
Yeah, I think that's very sage advice. Well, I just asked you for advice about a pointed question, but my favorite question to ask guests, I should say, is the best piece of advice that they have ever received that they would like to pass along to our listeners.
Man, I've received so much good advice. I'm gonna answer. I have two answers, actually, if that's okay.
Oh, absolutely.
The first one was, if it won't matter in 5 years, don't spend more than 5 minutes on it. And that's something good. I tell myself or hear myself giving out a lot too, is if this isn't going to matter in 5 years, if you have emotions about it, feel those emotions for 5 minutes. But at the end of that, you either find the solution or you move on. And I just think that especially in our culture today, where, social media and our phones, there seems to be fires to put out constantly. But really, if it's not going to matter in 5 years, then you shouldn't waste energy and time on that for more than 5 minutes. And then the second piece of advice is kind of more like a horse training, coaching philosophy, if you will. But if you find yourself on your horse or in a situation and you get angry, typically that means you've run out of knowledge. And that's something that my dad has taught me a lot, is when you find yourself resorting to anger, you need to learn more. You need to learn more about the problem, or need to learn more about your horse, or learn more horsemanship on how to find solutions for this problem. And so when you find yourself getting angry and frustrated, typically that means you need to learn more. And honestly, I haven't done a great job of keeping that in mind in my own roping experience. Now that I say that, I'm like, man, I needed to think about that the other day. Not so much for my horse, but for myself. I was getting frustrated that my runs weren't coming together as I wanted them to. But that just means I need to learn something. You know what I mean? And along with that, I would say that the most growth happens when you're the most uncomfortable. And so if you find yourself angry and frustrated, it's probably because you need more knowledge. But to get that more knowledge, you're going to have to be uncomfortable. Whether that means asking someone who knows more, or putting yourself in a situation to be vulnerable and be coached on by someone else, or try something new that you're not good at. That's something I've been telling my athletes a lot this semester specifically, is, hey, there's growth in the uncomfortable. I know this isn't comfortable. I know this feels awkward. I know that, this isn't what you're used to, but that just means we're getting better. So keep at it. And, I think those kind of go together. So those 3 pieces of advice, but I think all of 3 of those are really important and things that apply in the arena and beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as you look to the next year or couple years, what are some of your personal goals that you hope to see through?
Yeah, I like that question. One goal that I had set this year is I actually bought my pro rodeo card this year. I had been on my permit previously, and I really wanted to win the rookie in my circuit. Unofficially, I accomplished that, but amidst trying to accomplish that goal, I came up with a new goal of making the circuit finals, and I failed just a few $100s short of that this year. So next year, my goal is to make the circuit finals in the breakaway roping. And I also have a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old colt that I want to get started in the breakaway roping. I would like to maturity both of them in the breakaway roping as well. I would love it if my 4-year-old could make the World Show in the junior breakaway roping. That would be a huge goal of mine as well. And then beyond that, just trying to get life a little bit more figured out. I can't say that, for career wise, I have any big, large goals. Just doing my best every day and trying to find the right balance of chasing my own goals personally and professionally. And then also, balancing the priorities that life comes with. I have a lot of people that I love all around the world, and being able to see them and spend quality time with them is important to me, but not necessarily something that I do a very good job at. So getting a little bit more time with those I love is probably a goal for me over the next year, I would say.
Awesome. I love that. Doing our best every day. I think that's all we really can do. So, Alexa, we've covered a lot of ground today. Is there anything we missed that you'd like people to know?
No, I think, as always, social media is a highlight reel. So please, always, if you're looking at my social media or anyone else's that you might admire, just understand that it is a highlight reel, and there's so many more challenges that come with life success. I think that we as a society aren't very good at showing the lows along with the highs, but there's a lot of lows and a lot of valleys, and that is defined differently for everyone too. And so I would just say, wake up every day and try to be 1% better. Another piece of advice that I try to follow is to do something every day that gets me closer to my goals. And that kind of helps me find that balance. If I'm not able to practice on my own horses that day, if I went to the gym, I did something that got me closer to my goals. Or if I listened to a podcast or did something that helped my mental game. We don't have to do it all the time. But if we can do one thing every day that gets us a little bit closer to reaching our goals, then we've accomplished something. And giving 100% every day is going to look different one day to the next. And so I would just say, don't get too caught up in trying to make your life look like everyone else's, and really try to determine what you want your life to look like, and just commit yourself to getting 1% better that direction every day.
Well, Alexa, I can't tell you how enlightening this conversation has been. Thank you so much for spending some time with us and sharing your story today.
Of course. Thank you so much for reaching out and allowing me to share a little bit about myself, and for the wonderful questions and Facebook stalking. I appreciate
it. Well, as a reminder, all episodes of Breaking the Barrier are available to watch on YouTube. So if you'd like to do that in the future, please keep that in mind. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review and share with a friend. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.